On February 28, 2020, Delay in Block was trackside yet again with our friends from the Heritage Railroad. Known for its classic diesel locomotives shared with the Southern Appalachia Railway Museum, the Heritage Railroad is always certain to brighten any rail fan's cloudy day. Home at last after 3 years of pulling special trains on CSX, the Orlando and Northwestern, and the Ohio Rail experience is Clinchfield Railroad 800. Since being restored by CSX in 2017, the 800 had not yet operated in Oak Ridge. On this cold and windy day, 800 was assigned to a freight train with high hood GP30 number 2561, which is one of only 6 remaining of its kind in preservation. Still in primer, the museum plans to repaint the iconic locomotive into the Southern Railway tuxedo scheme in the future. The 2 veteran locomotives would pull a 5-car train from the K25 site to the Norfolk Southern Interchange point at Blair. These cars were carrying transloaded materials for an online customer. The Heritage Railroad, the Southern Appalachia Railway Museum known as SARM, and the East Tennessee Railcar Services all occupy the K25 site and are intertwined with the same personnel and volunteers. The Heritage Railroad leases equipment from the museum, which means classic consists like this are a weekly occurrence. After starting the U-boat, the Oak Ridge boys fired up the 800 and the GP30 before making some switching movements near the yard office.
Wade, what's your opinion of GP30s?
They suck. But this one's a Southern high hood, so that makes it kind of. We're getting everything ready to go. Gonna be doing some switching, putting 800 out of the way. Can't really switch freight with a cab unit without platforms. Do our switching with the U23B and the Jeep 30. And then 800 will do the honors and taking the train out for its first time.
To start the day, the 3 vintage locomotives shoved onto 2 empty cars, which were later moved in place for transloading later in the day. The string of empty cars was moved before the crew tied onto the loaded cars for clearance purposes. We rode along from the cab of the GP30 as the 3 locomotives and their short consist followed Perimeter Road. LIX 9553, known as the Maintenance of Wade locomotive, was built in March of 1975 by General Electric as Louisville and Nashville U-23B number 2817. The locomotive would make its way through the L&N, becoming part of the Seaboard Systems roster and later CSX, where it was renumbered to 3318. In the 1990s, 3318 was assigned to CSX's Maintenance of Way department, where it received orange and black paint and was renumbered to 9553. In the early 2000s, 9553 was sold to Vintage Locomotive Incorporated, which is owned by SARM member Ed Bowers, who sent the U-boat to Oak Ridge to become part of SARM's collection. The locomotive was not included in the train's consist this day, but is a favorite locomotive of many East Tennessee rail fans for its uniqueness as the only preserved CSX Maintenance of Way locomotive. About a quarter mile from the yard office, the crew cut the 9553 out of the consist. Several rail fans were following the move and stopped to get photos of the crew rearranging the locomotives. "9553 was stored behind the perimeter fence where SARM safely keeps and maintains its vintage equipment. 800 was also set out for a short time, while the 2561 was used to switch cars. Since switching with covered wagons isn't exactly easy, the GP30 provided much better visibility for the crew to shove cars around the facility. Protecting the crossing was SARM member Alex Wood. While in the area to visit family, Wood volunteered to help with the freight move to Blair. Alex conducted engineer Wade White to tie onto former Georgia Central U-23B high hood number 3965 and a string of miscellaneous passenger equipment. The crew of three, Alex, Wade, and conductor Aaron Bobian, would work together to move and reposition the passenger equipment so that a caboose could be added to their freight train as an idler car. GP30 number 2561 was built in 1962 by EMD for the Southern Railway, where it would remain in revenue freight service until being sold to the Sequatchie Valley Railroad of Bridgeport, Alabama in April of 1991. After a few short years of service on the Sequatchie in the early 90s, the locomotive would eventually be acquired by the Southern Alabama Railroad in Troy, Alabama. In 2003, the locomotive was sold to the Gulf and Ohio Railway's Knoxville Locomotive Works, where it remained for 6 years. In 2009, the locomotive was acquired by the Walden's Ridge Railroad Company, the contracted operator of the Heritage Railroad. VLIX U-23B number 3965 was built in February of 1977 by General Electric for the Southern Railway. 3965 would make its way through the 1982 creation of Norfolk Southern. The high hood U-boat would end up being sold to the Georgia Central Railroad in the late 90s, where it would operate in revenue freight service until 2012, when the 3965, along with the majority of the Georgia Central's beloved GE fleet, were replaced by EMDs as a result of being acquired by Genesee and Wyoming. Upon 3965's retirement, Vintage Locomotive Incorporated would step in to save 3965 from the torch by purchasing the locomotive from Genesee and Wyoming and then sending it to Oak Ridge to become yet another piece in the SARM collection. The K25 site is currently being redeveloped as the East Tennessee Technology Park. Up until 2016, the museum operated excursion trains over the privately owned track within the facility under the name Secret City Excursion Train. The operation ended when the lease agreement between the two organizations was renewed under different terms. Slowly, with a steady hand on the throttle, Wade backed the train to set off the caboose. K25 is known for being the site where the Little Boy atomic bomb was built during World War II. K25 was the code name given by the Manhattan Project to the program to produce enriched uranium for atomic bombs using the gaseous diffusion method. When it was built in 1944, the four-story K25 gaseous diffusion plant was the world's largest building, comprising over 1.64 million square feet of floor space and a volume of 97.5 million cubic feet. Construction of the K25 facility was undertaken by J.A. Jones Construction. At the height of its construction, over 25,000 workers were employed on the site. After setting out the caboose, the train eased forward again so that Conductor Bobian could grab the switch. Gaseous diffusion was but one of three enrichment technologies used by the Manhattan Project. A slightly enriched product from the S-50 thermal diffusion plant was fed into the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant. Its product, in turn, was fed into the Y-12 electromagnetic plant, a calutron or mass spectrometer originally designed and used for separating the isotopes of uranium. The enriched uranium was used in the Little Boy atomic bomb, which was dropped on Hiroshima. In 1946, the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant became capable of producing a highly enriched product. After the war, four more gaseous diffusion plants, named K-27, K-29, K-31, and K-33, were added to the site. The K-25 site was renamed the Oak Ridge Gaseous Diffusion Plant in 1955. Production of enriched uranium ended in 1964, and gaseous diffusion finally ceased on the site on August 27, 1985. The Oak Ridge Gaseous Diffusion Plant was renamed the Oak Ridge K-25 Site in 1989 and the East Tennessee Technology Park in 1996. The demolition of all 5 gaseous diffusion plants was completed in February of 2017. Once the switch was thrown, the museum's equipment was placed back in its original position with the empty transload cars. The crew then tied onto the caboose and shoved back into the plant to acquire the loaded cars for the outbound freight train. Once 2561 was in position with the caboose and freight cars, 800 backed into the plant to tie on to the head end. 5 loaded cars ready for interchange, the crew was almost ready to depart. But before they left the plant, we asked the 3 men to do an interview about their experience at the Heritage Railroad and the Southern Appalachia Railway Museum.
I guess this is what, first revenue freight 800's pulled, and well, I guess technically coming out of Ravenna was freight.
Well, we did some revenue freight down in Florida, remember?
Yeah, did some revenue freight in Florida, so I guess it's its first time in 2020 pulling freight.
First time in 2020. Well, it's a pretty cool day so far. 72-year-old locomotive. What is y'all's favorite part about running trains here on the K25 site?
Oh man. Well,
we get to play with a lot of really cool locomotives.
Well, really cool locomotives and making it to the top of the hill without having to double it.
So tell me about the hill. What is this hill?
Well, we got 2 hills. We got one here on the K line, which will go up. It's the steepest. It's around 3%. And if this train will make it up to the top of this hill, then it'll make it up the hill to Blair, which is about 2% at its peak. So we'll give it all she's got, see what she does. If not, we got the G30 back there that runs, and we'll give it a little muscle to help it over the hill. And either way, we're going to make it. But if we can make it without stopping, that'd be great. It'd be a nice workout for 800.
Alex, you're a Class 1 guy. What's it like working here with the guys here at Oak Ridge?
Well, a little more relaxed. That's not to say that safety isn't an issue here. It's absolutely an issue, but there's a little less bureaucracy, and it's good to work with somebody like Charlie that runs a tight ship here and manages to do it with equipment that's 70 years old. It's a lot different than running equipment that's 10 years old, but it's fun. I've known everybody here longer than any of us have worked for the railroad, so being able to play railroad with the people you like is certainly fun. Sometimes in my daytime job I have to spend 12 hours in a 5x8 box with every now and then somebody I don't like. So
well, you know, it's interesting because I want to say this is the first time all 3 of us have been on a train crew together.
Yeah.
Since we started hanging out back in 2012. It was the first time we all hung out first time.
Yeah.
So this will be the first day.
First time we've all 3 took a train out together,
Yeah.
So what is it about railroads, and I guess we can start with Aaron and go towards Alex. What is it about railroads that fascinate you and inspire you to do what you do on a daily basis?
I just like the way the machines sound. They really sound like they're doing a lot of work, all the way from early EMD 2-stroke engines to the GE 4-strokes to the GEVOs. They sound like real mechanical muscle. I always was fascinated with the sounds of it. I think that's kind of where I started.
I kind of like the historical aspect of it. That's what I like about out here a lot. Got the historical K25 site, and using some really kind of historical engines. So I guess I like the history of it.
Well, I was born and raised next to the Illinois Central Railroad and the Union Pacific CSX in Tuscola, Illinois, so pretty much surrounded by trains from the time I was a young child. And I just always have enjoyed it, and eventually all my friends ended up being rail fans. I tell everybody that I am a rail fan first and a railroader second, because I wouldn't be where I am if I wasn't in the hobby.
So what are we moving today out of K25? What kind of commodity are we moving?
Hazmat,
hazardous materials. Require special handling. We make a special effort when we go to moving this stuff to make sure our billing is right and our paperwork is right, and we move it safely. And so we handle it with care that we can, and it is heavy. 86,000 pounds per piece for those big boxes, the big gray ones on the flat cars. We call them bubs, big ugly boxes for short. They're 86,000 pounds a piece. We got 4 of them plus 1 spine car with some smaller boxes on it, and it's a pretty good load. Jeep 30 usually moves 6 of those pretty well, number 8 throttle. We got 5 of them today, so 800 ought to be getting a good leg stretching on what we're doing today.
What's the caboose for?
That is our spacer car. When you're using a train and road service, you have to have a spacer between you and your hazmats. Not necessarily with switching, but in hazardous material handling, you do have to have spacer.
So any advice you three would like to give to somebody who's interested in volunteering at a railroad museum or looking to get a job with the railroad?
Oh boy, run.
Don't do it.
Don't do it, it's a trick.
Make your kids like cars. That's better than railroading.
Or tractors.
Tractors.
My advice would be on a serious note. If you're interested in railroads, want to work in it, it is a good job. The class ones are a little shaky sometimes, but there is good money to be made, and you have to sometimes separate the hobby from the job, but not too much to where you don't enjoy it anymore, because if you become disgruntled in this, you'll end up bitter and sorry. You can't take it so seriously that it comes home with you every night.
Awesome. Well, guys, how can people find out more about the Heritage Railroad or SARM?
Well, I will say that when you watch this locomotive today pull this somewhat heavy little train up the hill, it's a 70-something-year-old locomotive that East Tennessee Railcar does all the work on. So if you need any more evidence of the skill that Charlie and his crew have, it's the fact that a freight train in 2020 can be pulled by a locomotive built in 1948 and do so just as well as a locomotive built yesterday.
Just after 1 p.m., the train departed K25 with Clinchfield 800 doing the honors as the lead locomotive. This was the 72-year-old veteran's first freight train of the decade and one of its first revenue freight trains in over 25 years. After crossing Perimeter Road, the train battled a significant hill at K25. Listen as the 800 gave it all she had up the grade. We followed the train from K25 to Blair, a distance of just over 7 miles. This portion of the railroad was where the SARM operated the Secret City excursion train until 2016. Carefully watching, listening to, and pacing the 800 from his truck was Charlie Poling, president of the Heritage Railroad, who was making sure the old gal was in tip-top condition while in charge of the train. At Blair, along the Knoxville and Ohio District Main Line, the Heritage Railroad interchanges with Class 1 Railroad Norfolk Southern. When paralleling the track from Harriman Highway, one can see the transload cars waiting to be picked up by NS. The Heritage Railroad crew didn't have any inboard cars to pick up, so they set out the loaded bubs for Norfolk Southern and returned with only the caboose.
Yeah.
Present for this special occasion was the one and only Brother Cletus Rose, a local rail fan with a charming personality.
What's your favorite thing about the Heritage Railroad?
All of it. It's the dedication of the folks and the lovely atmosphere.
What's it like seeing a 72-year-old diesel locomotive out on the rails pulling a freight train in 2020?
It's kind of like me being out there on 2020, man. We're both old.
It's a classic, though.
It, in fact, is a classic. I remember as a little boy when we used to see them go by and didn't look up for them. There were so many of them. They were everywhere, ubiquitous. That's
Pretty
not
cool.
so anymore.
What is it like seeing a Jeep 30 with a high hood in 2020? Does it remind you of the good old days?
I never did care for the road switchers other than the Alcos, but I'll take these GP30s.
Much better than Gevos, right?
Amen.
Amen. Awesome. Thanks, Cletus.
.800 was set out so that 2561 could be repositioned for the return trip back home. After 2561 was in the clear, 800 grabbed the loads and set them off for Interchange. After 800 and the rest of the cars cleared the switch, we rode in the cab of 2561 with Engineer Wade, while the crew performed some switching maneuvers.
Lined up. All right, creeping. double check on the switch. Here we go.
One double. Yes, sir. Go on hand while they're talking. Go ahead, Charlie. Peyton says if it starts snowing, you got to back it down the hill and do it all again. Sir, may we have another? Oh, yeah. A little stretch.
Going forward, the brake. That was a soft company.
Wade, how does it feel to be operating one of the only high hood GP30s in the country?
I would rather be in a U-boat. No, I'm just kidding. No, this engine's not a bad engine overall. It does all right for an EMD. As the world knows, I don't care for the EMDs.
Pretty much clear, 2561, get it charged up, 8 heads.
All right, charging it up. Let me know when they start coming down back there, Mr. Bogan.
Cars in the transload. How many you want? You want 6 up or you want 2 up? Put 6 up in there. Okay. Unless you have other specific instructions from the customer. Not really. I'll grab 2 connector road and I'll grab another 4 back in the back. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for playing Quickie Railroad. Take 4 more there, 51. 3 now. Steps out in front of you there, it has the cut rolling past you. Yeah, I got you. I'll leave everybody to get their still pictures in once it's bad.
I think I'm just an idiot.
Hate is gonna hate, Wade.
Pretty much. Play is gonna play, they're just gonna hate.
2561, Brakeman's clear. Release them, see if they hold.
Knocking them off.
So Wade, answer me this. Are high hoods really that hard to see out of?
I don't much care for them. From a picture standpoint, they're all right, but I mean, as you can see, you can't see anything, anything past the nose.
As you can see, you can't see.
Yeah, as you can see, you can't see. So, for a from a visibility or safety standpoint, I can see how a low nose would be safer, but I can see how this from a safety.
Knock the brakes off.
They should be off on the car.
Sometimes those pistons don't always go in with the handbrake set.
Man, it is coming down out there. Weather knows what it wants to do today.
After the cars were set into position and tied down, 2561 led Clinchfield 800 and the caboose back to K25, where the crew continued working. We chased the train back to the plant along Blair Road with Alex Wood at the controls of 2561. Back at the plant, 2561 arranged and assembled a train of empty cars for delivery at the K25 transload site. While 2561 and 800 were busy assembling their train, we set up at Wheat Station, where SARM once processed ticket sales for passengers riding the Secret City train. This was our last shot, ending a well-rounded day on the Heritage Railroad. After all, where else could you see such a variety of vintage locomotives and revenue freight service? We thank you for watching our latest video on the Heritage Railroad and the legendary Clinchfield 800. Until next time, happy railroading from all of us at Delay and Block Productions.